feet. Going down at 2. 10 feet. 10 feet. Contact. Stop, push. Engine stop. Okay, Houston, the Challenger has landed. It's now 6-8.
Okay, copy that.
Man, I never... You can't believe how tough it is getting around this river on this slope.
We got another 40 minutes before we have to leave for Station 8 someplace. That's right.
Well, Bob, I think I've done the best I can. I'd say that they're
Like
pretty clearly inclusions of
It looks like that
Blue Gray and
the right
and orthopedic Gabbro.
That is
You're near the
the LMP there.
contact.
Yes.
Okay, and Gene, your bag is hanging by one loop there. Be careful.
No, dead coming.
Jack Schmidt having a few problems.
99, proceeded, 3, 2, 1, ignition. Right away, Houston. Vector good. Ag thought.
Apollo 17 targets another geologically rich area of the moon. But this will be Project Apollo's final lunar landing. Budget cuts force NASA to scrub 3 more missions already scheduled.
We were disappointed because they canceled 18, 19, and 20. We had the hardware. We had crews picked. And all it was operational money.
NASA wants the last moon mission to be their greatest. The landing site demands the first night launch of the giant Saturn V rocket. On board, Ron Evans is command module pilot. Harrison Schmitt is NASA's first scientist in space. And the commander of Apollo 17 is Gene Cernan, a veteran of Gemini 9 and Apollo 10.
Apollo 17 was a real goal of mine. I knew before we launched that Apollo 17 was going to be the last flight to the moon, and I knew I would be the guy who make the final steps on the moon. There are a lot of people, I think, in positions of responsibility within NASA who, being the last flight, just wanted me to get back alive.
More than 500,000 people come from all over the world to watch the final lunar launch.
Roger, we're go for liftoff here, Captain.
Apollo 17 is Gene Cernan's second trip to the moon. On Apollo 10, he flew a lander to within 47,000 feet of the lunar surface. This time, he's cleared to land.
I needed to go back on Apollo 17 I wanted to cover the last 47,000 feet. I've been to the moon, folks. I'm not going back again, not to land. And I think people knew that. Obviously, I was not going to do something dumb, but I was going to land.
You're looking real good, Jim. Right down the line. Stand by for touchdown. Stand by. 25 feet. Down at 2. Feels good. 20 feet. Going down at 2. 10 feet. 10 feet. That contact. Stop, push. Engine stop. Okay, Houston, the Challenger has landed.
Gene Cernan and Harrison Schmitt join an elite fraternity. Only 12 men have landed on the moon.
As I step off at the surface at Taurus Littrow, we'd like to dedicate the first steps of Apollo 17 to all those who made it possible.
Over the next 3 days, Cernan and Schmitt spend more time walking on the moon than any other astronauts.
I was strolling on the moon one day in a merry, merry month of December. May's the month. May, that's right. May is the year of the month.
A team of scientists monitors their work.
Hey! There is orange soil. Well, don't move it till I see it. It's all over. Orange! Don't move it till I see it. I've stirred it up with my feet. Hey, it is! I can see it from here. It's
Okay,
orange.
Let's think about this thing logically. You know, they're up against a constraint anyway, so they got to leave at a certain time regardless of what we got.
We'd like you to leave immediately. Okay. My golly, this time goes fast.
3 years after Neil Armstrong became the first man to walk on the moon, Gene Cernan prepares to be the last.
When I crawled up the ladder, I knew I wasn't going to be coming this way again. And I just wanted to stop time. I wanted to freeze time. I want to take advantage of this moment.
Okay, 1 minute, Houston. We're 50 seconds now, and we're go. You're looking good here.
It's only 11 years since Alan Shepard became the first American in space and John Kennedy challenged the U.S. to go to the moon. Now, Apollo 17 is the end of an era.
It's like the breaking off a love affair. You've had a marvelous time, but now it's time to bring that relationship to an end.
3, 2, 1, ignition. Right away, Houston. Vector good. Max start. Good over. Yes, that's right.
Cernan and Schmitt start the long journey home. The camera on the rover will transmit pictures back to Earth for another 27 hours. The final images from man's last trip to the moon.
Later this year, Apollo 17 astronaut and geologist Jack Schmitt will mark 45 years since his first steps on the moon in December 1972. Those footprints left an impression on both the moon and on Schmitt.
No matter how much preparation you have for experiences like stepping on the moon, it's going to be more than you ever anticipated.
Schmitt was the first trained field geologist to observe the moon up close and personal, and he found himself discovering unexpected things with every step.
Every rock that we examined had something new that I didn't expect, and surprises is what geologists like. That's why you're exploring, is to see the things that nobody's ever seen before.
Schmitt spent a combined 22 hours outside of the spacecraft during his 3 excursions on the moon. Before his own trip, Schmitt trained other Apollo astronauts, sharing with them his in-depth knowledge of fieldwork.
The main thing was to expose them to as many different, say, geological experiences as we possibly could. Get them out in the field. Don't let them sit in the classroom.
He treated training scenarios on Earth the same way he would if they were on the moon, including simulated equipment, backpacks, and cameras strapped to the front of spacesuits. Astronauts could then focus on what differences in the rocks they were seeing and what rock samples were best to collect, essentially giving them the fundamental field geological experiences that they needed to succeed. The 4 or 5 days per month Schmitt spent training astronauts in the field really did make a difference.
The quality and diversity of the Apollo sample collection, independent of Apollo 17, where you had an experienced geologist, the quality and diversity of that sample collection is just remarkable.
Fortunately, the current Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter mission, or LRO, is changing the game, bringing back high-quality photography of the moon that Schmitt only wished he'd seen before his own trip.
The Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter program now has provided us with a much, much higher resolution suite of photographs for any future astronauts.
What we learned from the Apollo missions helped lay the groundwork for LRO, and LRO will help guide future explorers.
Every new environment in which a geologist works is usually very different than the last, but you have learned things from your previous experiences that do in fact enable you to maximize the value of your new experience.
Schmitt has his fingers crossed for future moon exploration, a landscape he considers holds answers to many questions about the early solar system.
You can hear people talk about it, but you can't absorb it until you're there.
The moon. It's our nearest neighbor in space, and data we gather from its features can tell us a lot about the rest of our solar system. And through the eyes of the LRO spacecraft, we can explore the lunar surface in all new ways, in fascinating detail. Our tour begins on the western border, where the near side of the moon meets the far side. The enormous feature is a lunar crater, and it's known as the Oriental Basin. Here, LRO's terrain map combines with surface gravity measurements from the Grail mission. This data reveals structure in the lunar crust beneath the surface, giving us a window into the geologic features of the moon's interior. Our next location receives little direct sunlight and has some of the coldest recorded temperatures in the solar system, the South Pole. The highlighted spots signify potential water ice based on temperature readings from LRO's Diviner instrument and reflectance from its laser altimeter Lola. Lola also allows us to peer into the darkness of Shackleton Crater by bringing us this digital elevation model. It's 21 kilometers wide and 4 kilometers deep, but it pales in comparison to the largest known impact crater in the Earth-Moon system, the South Pole Aitken Basin. Sitting on the far side, it's 2,500 kilometers across and 13 kilometers deep. We don't yet know exactly how old the basin is, but it was first seen in the 1960s by spacecraft flying around the far side. As much as we use LRO data to investigate areas we can't see from Earth, we also probe familiar territory on the lunar near side to bring back images with an all-new level of detail. This is Tycho Crater. It's around 100 million years old. Here, the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter camera captures the central peak with a 100-meter wide boulder at the summit, the origins of which are still a mystery. Continuing across the moon's near side, we will arrive in an area ripe for future exploration due to the diversity of impact and volcanic materials. It features a prominent crater so bright it's not only visible through telescopes, but also to the naked eye. Welcome to the Aristarchus Plateau. Here, infrared shows the mineral pyroxene in orange and a splash of plagioclase in blue from Aristarchus crater. This region can tell us a lot about the rich volcanic history of the moon. As much as we study the moon looking for sites to visit, we also look back at places we've already been. This is because the new data that LRO is gathering helps us reinterpret the geology of familiar places, giving scientists a better understanding of the sequence of events in early lunar history. Here, we descend to the Apollo 17 landing site in the Taurus-Littrow Valley, which is deeper than the Grand Canyon. The path the astronauts took over the course of 3 days is shown. The Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter camera is even able to capture a view of the bottom half of the Apollo 17 lunar lander, which still sits on the surface, as well as the rover vehicle. These images help preserve our accomplishment of human exploration on the moon's surface. Moving onward, we make our way to our final destination. This location contains regions that exist in permanent shadow, as well as ones that bask in nearly perpetual light. It's the North Pole. Detailed terrain measurements by Lola allow scientists to model sunlight and shadow at the poles over decades and centuries. Sunlit peaks and crater rims here may be ideal locations for generating solar power for future expeditions to the moon. This updated visualization of the lunar landscape stands as a testament to the functionality and abilities of the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter spacecraft. And as the mission continues to gather data, it will provide us with many more opportunities to take a tour of our moon.
Sample of both sides, but I wouldn't bet on it. Okay, I just got a check of that side.
They have what I consider one of
you talk about kind of what went into your sampling strategy and how you chose which samples to bring back?
The idea was to get as broad a spectrum of new samples as we possibly could, and that turned out pretty well. We did. And in fact, we sampled at least ejecta, what we call melt ejecta from 3 major basins, maybe 4. We sampled fragments that almost certainly came from the deep mantle of the moon. We didn't know that at the time. That's only recently that we figured that out. And that we also then added to our broad knowledge and history of these volcanic eruptions that have occurred on the moon over time. Now when you go to the moon on the way to Mars, Jessica, that education I think you're going to get on the moon will be very relevant to Mars. But Mars, of course, does not have that micrometeorite impact environment that we have on the moon, because it has a small atmosphere, about 1/100th of that of the Earth, and that filters out the small impact. The main weathering process on the moon are these micrometeorite impacts and solar wind spallation of the surface. Solar wind's made up of high energy particles, so they actually erode the surfaces of rocks as well as change the character of the debris layer on the moon. On Mars, the dominant erosive force is wind.
Yep.
And so if you're used to studying geomorphology here on Earth that involves wind,
you're in good shape.
You can learn a lot about what you're going to see on Mars. But all of that comes from studying the moon.
Right.
If we hadn't had the moon, we wouldn't understand this early history of the Earth, or even speculate about what it might be, speculate intelligently anyway, about what it might be.
Between 1968 and 1972, America launched 9 human missions to the moon, 6 of which successfully touched down, allowing 12 men to walk on the lunar surface. NASA's next chapter of lunar exploration, called Artemis, has the task of not just going to the moon to create a long-term human presence on and around it, but also to prepare for ever more complex human missions to Mars. In short, everything we must be able to do here, we must first do here. So, what will an Artemis mission look like? Everything is designed and tested with our most important element in mind, the astronauts. This is their deep space, human-rated spacecraft called Orion, built in 3 parts. The crew module, where up to 4 astronauts will live and work throughout the flight. The service module, with life support systems for the crew and its own engine and fuel reserves. And a launch abort system, with engines capable of pulling the crew module to safety during launch should anything go wrong. To accomplish the task of launching our crew and heavy payloads, NASA is building the Space Launch System, comprising of a cargo hold, an exploration upper stage, a massive core stage, and 2 extended solid rocket boosters. Altogether, this is the world's most powerful rocket, and it exceeds the legendary Saturn V of the Apollo era in numerous ways. Sitting on the launch pad, the entire rocket, fully fueled, weighs just over 6 million pounds, 5.2 million of which is just the fuel. Once ignited, there was no stopping what comes next. All 4 RS-25 engines and the 2 solid rocket boosters come to life, thundering our crew upwards. 2 minutes after ignition, the solid rocket boosters are spent and released. 8 minutes after launch, the core stage is depleted and separated. The upper stage fires briefly, placing Orion into a parking orbit around the Earth. Here, the crew reconfigure the spacecraft and check systems to confirm everything is ready for deep space travel. With a go from mission control, the crew reignite the exploration upper stage engines to leave Earth entirely. The exact timing of this maneuver is critical to reach a speed that can escape Earth's gravitational pull, but also put Orion on a course that will intersect the moon days later. Once this burn is complete, the upper stage of the SLS is jettisoned and the crew aboard Orion coast for several days toward all that awaits them at the moon. Approaching the moon, we see the fundamental differences between Artemis and Apollo. Instead of requiring Orion to serve as an expendable lunar command module or to carry a constrained lunar lander, the Artemis missions will take advantage of a different approach: pre-staging. Everything needed for lunar missions will be positioned in advance by commercial and international partners. This includes rovers, science experiments, and human-rated systems on the surface. But it also includes a dedicated lunar station in orbit around the moon called Gateway. Here at this station, we can pre-stage a robust lunar lander and establish a strong communications relay. Designed with open standards, the Gateway can be expanded as new missions and partnerships develop, allowing multiple human missions on the moon at the same time and enabling ongoing science to be conducted even between human missions. The Gateway is also capable of adjusting its orbit to allow access to every part of the moon, something the Apollo missions could not do. But the real key in this approach is placing Gateway in a unique halo orbit to perfect the maneuvers needed for Mars missions. And with the growing list of commercial and international opportunities, Gateway is the ideal hub between Earth and all that lies beyond. Returning to our crew as they approach Gateway, the Orion must match the elliptical orbit of the station in order to successfully dock. Once on board, pre-selected crew members transfer to the lunar lander, while those assigned to Gateway remain on station. The lunar lander system itself is built for 3 unique steps: descending from the halo orbit of Gateway down to a low lunar orbit, descending from low lunar orbit to the surface, and once the lunar mission is complete, launching from the surface of the moon and ascending all the way back to the orbiting Gateway. Once back aboard the Orion spacecraft and undocked from Gateway, the crew fire their engine once to break out of the halo orbit and once again to sling the spacecraft around the moon, placing it on a multi-day trajectory back towards Earth. As they near the end of this journey, the service module is released, and the crew module is oriented heat shield first. Entering Earth's atmosphere at 25,000 miles per hour, the friction of air slows Orion considerably, while also subjecting it to temperatures of 5,000 degrees. With the Orion now at just 300 miles per hour, a series of parachutes uniquely tested and produced for this moment deploy, decelerating the craft to just 20 miles per hour for splashdown. With each successful mission, Artemis ushers in the next wave of men and women to explore our moon and prove that together we are ready to go beyond.
in truth, leading the world into a new and dynamic era of spaceflight. The nation is proudly behind us in this endeavor, and I am happy to announce that President Donald Trump's fiscal year 2021 budget request invests in NASA more than $25 billion. That's a 12% increase, and it includes $3.3 billion for a human landing system. This is a 21st century budget worthy of 21st century space exploration and one of our strongest budgets in NASA history. Orion is the first human spacecraft we've built for deep space missions in over a generation. After final testing is complete, the Orion will be returned to the Kennedy Space Center and be stacked atop the Space Launch System in preparation for the Artemis 1 mission. The Space Launch System rocket is the foundation, with more than 1,000 large and small businesses in 44 states contributing to the design and the assembly. The SLS rocket is, in fact, America's rocket. This budget includes more than $1.5 billion for exploration technology in support of the Artemis program. The 2021 budget also strongly supports planetary science, including providing funds to study the celestial bodies around us like never before.
Motor stable at 400.
The 2021 budget fully supports aeronautics research that enables breakthroughs, such as our X-57 all-electric experimental airplane. We are also moving forward on the testing of the low-boom flight demonstrator, with an anticipated first flight in 2022. This year, we must build on our success by continuing to devote ourselves to the agency mission. And the science and technology we are working on right now will prepare us in this new exploration to take humanity's next giant leap to Mars. Friends, we are the Artemis generation, and we are going. Thank you so much.
The OSIRIS-REx mission is an asteroid sample return mission, and the main goal is to collect 60 grams of pristine sample from the surface of the near-Earth asteroid Bennu. Bennu's rocky surface presented a challenge for the original LiDAR-based approach to the touch-and-go sample acquisition event. As an alternative, the project developed an onboard optical-based approach called natural feature tracking. NFT requires detailed three-dimensional maps of the surface of Bennu. In order to build those three-dimensional maps, we need many, many images of particular patches of surface on Bennu itself.
And so all these surveys we've done throughout the mission have been at distances between several kilometers from the asteroid down to just a few hundred meters from the surface. And based on those different perspectives and what the shading of that terrain is, it's possible to build a 3D model. Very similar to how we have two eyes that allow us to have depth perception of what we see. NFT requires multiple features across the field of view to have a depth perception.
The original tag accuracy requirement was to touch the surface within a 50-meter diameter circle. Based on Bennu's rough surface, our actual performance has to be much better than that, at 10 meters or less. And even within that 10-meter area, there could be smaller localized hazards that may damage the spacecraft.
Right now, we are working on a flight software patch to help us avoid hazards as we come in for a sample event. When we do natural feature tracking, that is all autonomous on board the spacecraft, where we load the features or a catalog to the spacecraft, so we are telling it where we expect these features to be.
So as the spacecraft makes its progress down to taking the sample, we're recording images and then locating those landmarks to make sure we're on the right track. And if there's any issues with the trajectory or we see landmarks where we shouldn't, we know something's up and we can back away and wave off the attempt, try again.